This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it's time for isms. Isms. We're going to talk about the positive isms. And one of the big ones that I really am hoping my guest can sort of help us out on is professionalism, because it seems to have gone out the window. And I'm going to give you a couple examples that we have experienced here in our home. The Friday before um, the Christmas holidays, um, my husband had been working IT, and he worked the whole day. And he was told that he had an assignment to come back the next day, which was unusual, but he said, okay. But a half hour after he got home, he got a phone call saying his contract had ended. Strangely, for that full week, he had been training a new person who was supposed to take on um, a smaller role. As it turns out, he was training his replacement.
Wow.
There's no professionalism in that, as far as I'm concerned. Um, there needs to be some honesty that goes along with it. And as he has decided over the last month or so, you know what, if he didn't want me, then I really don't want to be there either. But there should have been a dialogue.
Yeah.
Another bit of professionalism again hit my family. My youngest son has been working um, in sports, and um, he was up for a raise, and they chose not to give him a raise, not because he hasn't done a great job, but they wanted to move the money someplace else. So he was smart enough. He had his eyes and ears open on what was going on, and he made a move, and they got mad at him for making the move. Again, professionalism. Number one, we all have to look out for ourselves. We got to do it in the right way. So, Mark, the last time we spoke, um, you seem you shared some information with me, how you are helping your kids cope with just daily life.
Yeah.
And I know as a coach, you're probably coming up with some of the strangest scenarios from your clients as well. How do we get through challenges and troubled times? Because we're going through it right now.
Yeah. What an incredibly broad question, but
Yeah.
also a really good one, right? Like it's the one that it's underneath everything that we're all asking right now. It's not just there's the micro and there's the macro. Like, how do I get through this week? How do I get through this work day? But also, I can't just focus on, there's lots of schools of thought,
Right.
right? Be obviously be present in your day, be present with your kids, with your job, with your spouse or your partner or your friends. And also have an eye on sort of what the bigger picture is. Like you gave that great example with your son. I can think plenty of, I was working in tech in 99, 2000, 2001, sort of the early 2000s. And if you know anything about sort of the history of tech, that was the first big boom and crash
Right.
very, very quickly. And I remember at the time, I was in my early 20s and I was just like your son. I had my eyes and ears out, and it didn't really, sometimes I would sort of look for other opportunities and didn't need to take them. But when I did need to, I'm glad they were there. You know, um, One of the best, this is a great example of professionalism. One of the best things that really ever happened to me was I was working this tech job. It was really kind of my last, in this chapter, it was one of my last tech jobs. And I had also started going to art school at the time. So I was going and working all day, and I was at school at night, and I was really loving art school. So I was starting to go to more and more classes. So basically, I was like working all day, in school every night, in school on Saturdays. I was engaged, and that was falling apart because I was spending so much time just doing all these other things. That's not the story, but the story is, my boss, Amy, whose name I forget, but I've recently thanked her for this. She calls me into her office, and she's like, you're not really pulling your weight. Like your partner. I had a team partner on this user experience team. He's like, your partner's sort of like, he's not really getting a lot done. And I was like, you know what? I'm sorry. You're right. totally owned it. I'm having a hard time at home, and I'm letting that, affect me here. Mea culpa, let me fix it. And she was like, well, look, sort of secretly, like, can we keep this confidential? And I said, sure. And she was like, if hypothetically there were layoffs coming, would that be, and there was a severance package, would that be something that would interest you if you're really interested in these other things? And I said, give me, some time. And later that day, I said, you know what? I think you're right. I think you're right. I think you saw something. So it was just such a wonderful example of a relationship at work that kind of lived in that gray area. She wasn't my close friend. We didn't
Right.
keep in touch after that, but she was really keeping an eye on me and really, really encouraging me to do the thing that was best for me, even if that meant leaving the company. Obviously, the company was doing layoffs, so they needed, they needed people who were happy about it. And that worked out for them too. But I just love that she was very upfront with me. She didn't just go back and sort of make a decision and say, well, this is what I think is best, and let's not tell him, and let's sort of keep things siloed and not deal with feelings. She was willing to deal with my feelings in the moment, right? Like I could have just freaked out.
Yeah.
I was in my early 20s. I could have just, I could have gone crazy, but she was a really great, and I think the thing that I'm saying here about professionalism is that, it's not a patriarchal sort of daddy knows best or leader knows best kind of environment that really makes it great. That company went on to, to do well and get purchased, and all of those things happen for that company. And if all of the leaders, and I had other bosses at that company who were also similarly, they wanted to know a little bit about what I was passionate about,
Sure.
and they helped support that either with, I don't even remember if I ever got a raise at that company, but, through that kind of promotion, or even just saying like, would it make sense? I switched teams, actually. It was the same company. I was on an IT team, and they switched me over to a, sort of more front-facing team, or, more sort of website-facing team. And they did that because these people were really looking out for the people that they were working with. Now, I never felt the need to like go and sort of surprise them with a move because I felt so supported there. And if I did start to feel unhappy, I know that I could have gone to them and said, and I did actually. I had the head of HR was another person who was exactly like this, who was very upfront, very honest, very like, well, what is it that you actually want here? Here's some areas where we think we need a little bit more from you. And, does that actually interest you? Or should we be looking at something else? I think that's a great way to approach this kind of professionalism is to get at those desires and passions underneath, because that's what so much of miscommunication is about, is we have these surface things. I'll give you one more example.
Sure.
I had let's call it an argument, with my wife. I told her something was going to happen, and she was sort of put off by the way that I had approached it. And I could have gone and been like, well, that's how you tell me, and everything has to be fair and whatever. And I actually had the presence of mind to say, you know what? I think I was being a little passive aggressive there. And I think that there's actually a deeper issue that I would like to talk about, but I don't want to sit here and say it's your fault because I didn't
Sure.
come to you and tell you about this issue. So now we have an opportunity to have a conversation about something more meaningful, as I'm owning that I acted out of fear or frustration rather than, love and connection, which is what I want to do in my relationship, right?
Well, the things that you're talking about, I think most of those things, they should start at home because we have the people at home that in theory we are safe with.
Hmm.
And so learning how to communicate, I think, is extremely important. And I think when we're up against challenges, and this is a something that my husband and I sort of disagree on, when he gets upset about something, he just either totally withdraws and doesn't say anything, or he lets it all out. And I'm the one who wants to try to figure out, why did it happen? What can I do to, can I fix it? And if I can't fix it, how can I live with this situation?
Hmm.
And if you're going to be vocal about something, we have to be honest and professional about being vocal. Getting out and just screaming about something
Yeah.
um, doesn't help. Yesterday in our area, there were two protests going on. One is for the administration and all the great things that they think the administration is doing, which got out of hand. There was a peaceful one that was against the administration. And they just stood in solidarity. They had some signage. It wasn't mean, it wasn't nasty. It was just saying, instead of this, do this.
Yeah.
And as I saw both of those on the news, I thought to myself, it's too bad we can't learn from this. We should be
Hmm.
learning from this because you're both getting your voices out, but the loud voices, we don't know what the message is. It's just a lot of noise. A calmer message, it was there. It was there in print, and you could read it, you could see it, and you didn't feel threatened.
Yeah.
So in your home, as you discussed, you know, you could have had a confrontation with your wife,
Very, very
but
easily.
you're can all have confrontations with our spouses. Um, but it's a learning method on how to stay present and be calm and not point fingers.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's I'm not, I'm sort of telling you this story in this very sort of glib way, but it is not easy, and it takes work, and it takes intention.
Right.
You have to, I think, with the example with my wife, is the intention is to, create a connection that's closer in some way. And I think in order to do that, we have to be willing to own, sort of clean up our side of the street,
Right.
so to speak. Another thing, I run something called the Unleash Creativity Club, and it's a membership and a series of courses for creatives. And it's not about, I mean, there's lots of stuff in there about, people share all kinds of information about how to run their business and the sort of nuts and bolts. But a lot of the work that we do is this, what I call deep inner work. And it does happen, because people are in there, and there's it's asynchronous. We have our own private platform. People are in there and they're sharing, things that inspire them, or stories of their own, things that they've realized about how they want to operate, and these kinds of stories that we're telling each other. And sometimes someone comes in and says, I don't agree. I don't think that works. And so what do you do when you have, that sort of moral or just logistical kind of argument? And, I wonder how we can take what we do in our club, in our community, and do more of that kind of in the exterior world. So, in an example where someone says, I found this, very inspiring, quote or something, and someone says, I don't see the point of that, at all. But the way that we come together, at least in our community, is to have at least a foundation, a set of values that we adhere to, that we agree on. We agree that everyone deserves to be safe and feel safe sharing their opinion. Everyone deserves to have an opportunity to grow. So that's the one that for me is really important in all of these, scenarios, because I'm committed to my own growth as well as the growth of all the people that I work with. And in our community, that's something that we commit to, as individuals and as a community. So, what someone might come in and say is, well, what are we saying here? Like, share a little bit, get curious, right? Share a little bit more about your experience. What is the thing that really matters to you? Because someone might say, oh, this policy's great, this policy's bad, whatever. But can we all agree that we want to feel safe? Can we all agree that we want our kids to be healthy? That we want our kids to be happy? Now, we may disagree on what exactly that means, and I have a club with some dozens of people, and we live in a country with millions of people, and you're going to have people that just, what safety means, or what growth means, is going to be different for everybody. I do think that there's a line, as in our community and in the world, when I'm going out and saying that, my values in any way sort of threaten your safety, or threaten your capacity for growth, or the pursuit of happiness, or whatever. I think there is a line there, and that's where some of these disagreements get tricky, because people feel that line in different places. right? For some
Yeah.
people, even just, being a certain way, or, we see a lot of trans rights being taken away right now, or attacks on different marginalized groups of people. And these are my politics, and I think that some of those things, I don't see why we're even doing those things. Like, why is that important for us as a country, or the leaders of our country, to focus on that? Because that's actually making a group unsafe, and it's not actually creating any more safety. And I think that if we could really, this is my worldview. Like, I think if we could get, our leadership to be more creative, and to actually be interested in a solution that would be for, for all people. But that also requires all people to be accepting, and to allow, and to, trust that other people are going to pursue their happiness and their safety without, infringing, so to speak,
Right.
on various rights. And that's I think it gets very tricky. But again, for me, I have a very clear line where, we can disagree, but when the disagreement when someone's position naturally means, is based on oppressing anyone, I just can't agree with that. Now, do I need to go out and shout about it, or, be violent about it? No, I think you're right. There are other ways to go about this, but I do think that a firm line can and should be drawn with that, peaceful intent in mind.
Well, when I think about your group, and it's just one of millions of groups out there,
Yeah.
but when you have a group that gets along, knows how to communicate, or at least works at communication.
I would say works at it, not
Yeah,
because
yeah.
you have a few dozen people, even, it's, it doesn't always work out that way. But yeah, go on.
But we have to keep growing that outward because we have other people in other areas of our lives. So we've got to take that structure and bring it into other places. And I'm finding that a lot of people say, well, no, I can't do that. I'm
Mm,
only comfortable right here. Well, what
mhm.
happens when you go to the grocery store? What happens when you go to religious services? What happens um, when you go to the community pool? Okay, you're with other people. So taking that understanding of, I may not always be right, I can learn from others. I have to communicate and be kind to other people. Aren't we taught that? Isn't that what we teach our children? I mean, my son reminded me this the other day. He said, Mom, you always told me I was supposed to be nice to other people, even the guy who bullied me, even the guy
Mm.
who threatened to kill me. You told me to be nice. I said, what I told you was, don't be mean, don't be negative. Okay. But okay, so you heard nice. It didn't hurt you in this case. But what my comment always has been is that typically the bully is waiting for you to retaliate.
Right.
So if you don't, if you just, tread lightly, move over a step, get away from the bully, other people are going to follow you as well. Nobody wants to be bullied.
Yeah. There's something in what you're saying that, something that I've been thinking a lot about recently is, of course, the creative process. And with the creative process, you know, one sort of easy way to think about it is that, the creative process is you create a whole bunch of stuff. You create a mess. You have to make a mess. And then you start to look at that and say, well, what really needs to stay here, or what needs to go? And you start to sort of whittle things down, and then something new emerges. But if we sit there and say, and even in politics or with politics, if we sit there and say, well, I'm gonna do this, and we start to shoot down ideas as they come up, then we don't actually get to that messy part. But again, I use the word mess intentionally because it feels messy. And messy is, like, you use the word comfort. Messy is uncomfortable. People
Yeah.
aren't comfortable with that for the most part, or from what I've seen. Even people who are, very, very intentional on, on their own growth. Sometimes there's a discomfort with what's like the gray area, or the unknown. And again, I think there's a line like if you think about kind of your zone of comfort, whatever that is, your house, the way you live, your church, your not church, whatever it is, and there's, I wouldn't necessarily want to go way outside my comfort zone because it's hard to operate in that
Sure.
state. Too much fight, flight, too much cortisol. I can't actually think. I can't actually make good decisions. But there's an edge, right? There's an edge, and it's not just like a line, like suddenly comfort to discomfort. There's a gray area where you're like, okay, I'm a little bit on. You think about a time that you've done, anything new. If you think of something, if you're listening to this, think of something that you do now that you didn't always do. Now, there was a point when you started it, you were probably not that comfortable starting it. And I think it's the same when we start to look at these kinds of conversations and ideas. People have to be willing to say, like you have we've all had these conversations where I say, well, I think this should be true, or I think the government should do this, or whatever. And someone says, well, I actively disagree. Now we just have kind of an impasse.
Right.
But what we can do, and I'll say this, and I know that I might get comments about this too, but I think what we can do is get very curious. Well, why do you say that? What's really important to you about this? Okay, so we agree that our kids should be healthy, or whatever. You can kind of like find those areas of agreement and say, well, let's start there. Is there a good solution that we can come to from there rather than saying, I have a solution because of these deeper things? Let's start with the deeper things. Let's start with the things that matter to all of us and then have a conversation about what the best thing is. Now, obviously, like there's lots of people out there with, who are doing things because of money or fame or what, like there's all kinds of pressures and people are
Sure.
acting in ways that I actively don't agree with. But I'm talking about, when we're talking about changing the world or changing the country, I think so many of these things happen on a local level. I'm a big fan of like really looking into like who's doing things locally, what organizations are happening locally or even nationally, but like smaller organizations that aren't necessarily on the front page of the New York Times all the time, but who's out there doing the work that I believe in? How can I go and support that rather than being on Facebook arguing with people? It just hurts me. And there are people like my wife is one of the people, she's out there and she's actively engaging in that world. And I love that she does that. It would kill my nervous system to be, out there sort of the way that she is. But I can also support these organizations that I think are doing good work, that I think are aligned with my values, and I think are doing these things in a peaceful way where they're not hurting anybody, and they're making progress for groups that matter, and people that matter to me. Which, well, I would say everybody matters to me. I'm not really working with groups that are trying to hurt anybody, I think.
Right. Well, when I think of the creative process that you've talked about, art in many of its forms, we all don't like the same kind of art. We all don't like the same kind of music. Somebody posted, I came across it on Facebook today, and I'll never watch the Grammys again. And it's like, and I didn't watch the Grammys. I don't know who was up. It doesn't matter to me. I listen to whatever music I want to. But they were so upset about it. And I happen to know the person. So I contacted them personally and I just said, what was it about the show you didn't like? And the comment was, I didn't know 90% of the performers. I said, well, either you could have looked at it as I get to know a new 90%, or if I don't know it and
That's
I
right.
don't care about it, I can turn it off. And
That's right.
that's the thing that, you know, I don't understand sometimes when people will say, oh, that shouldn't be on TV. Well, why shouldn't it be on TV? Well, I
Yeah.
don't like the message. Well, you know what? You can turn it off. You don't have to watch it. You don't have to listen to it. And I think we can tell people this in a nice way. What is it you want to listen to? In this world today, I mean, not the world that I grew up in the 50s and 60s. There was a limit of what you could watch on TV.
Yeah.
Now, you can see anything. You can Google it. You can
Oh
find
man.
it somewhere.
I was talking to my kids about this. They cannot understand. They just doesn't they just it just they have no way of really understanding like what do you mean? you could just like you had to be home at a certain time. I don't understand what you're talking, and everything wasn't, I was like, no, we had a black and white TV. We had three channels and like a little knob that you
Yeah,
turned.
yeah,
We didn't even get the fancy channels, never mind cable. Um, but yeah, I mean, yeah, in talking about you said something interesting there, in talking about the creative process, we all have these choices. And it's always sort of funny to me when someone feels the need to say something like that on Facebook. Um, why not share things that we love? If everyone is out there sharing things that they love and understanding they have a choice to not listen to things. I was in another group this morning, a writing group that a friend of mine now runs, and she said something really interesting where she was saying, this space is for grown-ups, she said. She said what that means is people may write about stuff that you don't like. People may write words that you don't like. And if you don't like it, then maybe you leave this session or maybe you leave the group. Maybe it's not for you. And that's okay.
absolutely.
I don't watch the Grammys, not because I don't like them. I don't have it's not a thing that I do. I like seeing kind of what happened or whatever, but I don't turn it on. There's lots of things I don't watch. I'm also not spending my precious time on this planet getting out there and telling everybody about the things I don't like because I don't want to think about them. If I'm thinking about all of the things I don't like, then I mean, if you think about it, like how much we don't have that much time here. I just read one of the, I know everyone's reading this book now, but that book by Oliver Berkman, 4,000 Weeks. If you haven't read it, if you're listening to this, just go read the book. It's awesome. And he talks about like if you live on average 75, 76 years, you got 4,000 weeks. So what are we doing wasting our time on stuff that we don't like? I don't want to fill my day, my attention or my intention on things that I don't like. Can you imagine if I dedicated so much of my time to, I don't know, some sort of food I don't like or something? If I was like, I don't like chicken cacciatore and I'm gonna get out there and make sure that no one gets like what am I wasting my time on?
Exactly.
Someone likes chicken ketchup. It's not hurting anybody except the chickens. That's a whole other thing. We can talk about that separately. Um, but yeah, like what are you feeling? And I see stuff like that, and sometimes I feel it, and I appreciate that you reached out personally to respond, right? Like you reached out
Yeah.
individually, to someone who you had a connection to. And I think at times that's a really great thing. I think if I'm online and I feel like I need to comment back and shut them down, I'm feeding that own negative energy right into my life. And you know what? Creativity does not like negative energy. If you're trying to create in your life, and everybody's trying to create in their life, everybody's in the middle of this mess we call life, and we're all trying to create stuff out of it. So you don't have to be an artist. When I say create, I mean like, what are you doing on that, next week? What are you doing at work? What are you doing with your family? What are you having for dinner? Like these are all acts of creation. We do it every day, all the time. And if we're feeling like think about, we've all probably been there where you're like really just can't stop thinking about this thing that's really bothering you. Think about all the things that you missed out on. The nice conversation with your partner or your kids, or the really, beautiful thing, conversation with your neighbor about a new book. Instead, you're spending your time going to them, telling them about all the stuff you don't like. I It boggles the mind. Think about how many hours you spend on that and how much time we actually have on the planet. And it seems like what a waste. What a waste.
So now you just answered the big question for this podcast. And I
Oh, good.
and I absolutely love it. It's, you know, think about what's important to you. The negative stuff is really not important. The negative stuff really eats away at us. Okay. So if we want to stay on this planet for a nice long time, if we want to be healthy, if we want to engage with the people that we love and like, we got to think about those positive things. And, you know, I used to have a habit for a long time, probably 55 years of my life, where if something didn't go right, I remembered all the things in my life that had gone wrong.
Oh, yeah.
And I
Oh,
would spend time, and my father used to say, let Karen think about something that didn't go right in her life, and she'll sit in a corner and she'll cry. And I did. And I I don't know what woke me up, and it doesn't matter at this point because one day I just realized I'm wasting time. And it was in the middle of the winter.
mm,
I don't like the cold. I don't like the snow. I don't like the gray skies. But I remember sitting here at my desk, looking out my window, and I said, the sun is shining above the clouds. And I started thinking about the sun shining above the clouds.
that's a beautiful analogy.
And it was like, okay, so it is sunny out. And if the sun is shining, sun brings warmth. So I can be warm. I don't have to be cold. Now, granted, if I walked outside in the snow and the wind, I would probably be cold, but I could bundle up to handle it. And those are the things that I started to learn. I could sit here and cry about the fact that it's 5 degrees, windy, snow up to the tops of my windows, but where's it going to take me? So instead, I looked for the sun above the clouds. I also played a game with myself about, oh, spring is only 60 days away. Oh, it's only 59 days away. Even if spring was further than that, just knowing that it was there and that's my season. I love it. So I gave myself that positivity. So instead of complaining to everybody how miserable I was, that it was cold, it was gray, it was snowy, or that it was still another 60 days before spring, I turned it around. And that's
Yeah.
what I tell my clients. And when you made that comment, it was like, if I talk about all the negative things, I'm not going to get through the challenges we're going through right now. I'm going to make myself sick.
Yeah, and it's not to say, that I this is a phrase that has become more, I've heard it more and more about sort of toxic positivity. It's not to say that we can or should pretend like, things we don't like, aren't happening. Like we have to be aware of the world, and we have
Right.
to, protect ourselves, our communities, our families from things that we think are harmful, even if those things come from, our own leadership. And how do we take the energy that we do have when we're not, protecting ourselves? How do we take the energy that we do have in nurturing something that we think is positive? How do we find those connections and put that energy in there? There's, what is the phrase? What you pay attention to grows, or the grass grows where you water it. If I'm out there and I'm only focused on, negative things, if I'm only sharing negative things online and saying, "Oh, this is terrible, this is terrible, this is terrible," I've seen that actually with artists, and I've seen it hurt them in their professional careers even. If you're only out there saying about what everything is, and it's not to say those things aren't true, maybe they're true. And there's so much science, and there's so much research into how we talk about ourselves to ourselves, how we talk about ourselves to other people. I love a little, self-deprecating humor. And I've been called in by even people that I love that are like, I know you were joking when you said that, but I don't think it's true. I don't, whatever you said, about yours. I'm like, yeah, I know it's not true. They're like, so don't say it. You don't need to say that. And sometimes you might actually not see the positive things, and you have to, you kind of have to, live into it. You have to create that new story. I do this work with my clients sometimes, and it's sometimes, honestly, sometimes it's just talking to yourself or talking in the mirror or going through a meditation or visualization or a written exercise. It comes in all different forms, but we can start to train ourselves to notice, because it's an act, it's a process of noticing. If all we're noticing is negative things, again, it's just, there's so much research, including, Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote the book Body Keeps the Score, talks about this a lot. You know, if and he's working also with people who have come back from combat. So it's a very
Right.
different thing. And I do not want to say that I have any expertise with that community at all. But he puts his research out there and says, you know, many things, but but including, if we're only focused on these negative things, then it's going to physically hurt our bodies. There's research that shows this. So how do we create things, how do we focus on these things that are good for ourselves and good for others in a way that doesn't cause us to be in conflict all the time? How can we sort of remove that conflict or find areas in our life that are conflict free, that we can work on things that are beautiful? You know, I don't go to church. My dad was Jewish, Reformed Jew. My mom was Irish Catholic. You know, did a little bit of both, but don't have a strong religious practice. Now, I have friends who are quite religious. I have clients who are quite religious, and we celebrate that together. We celebrate their faith. We celebrate their belief, the thing that, that they love, that they're putting all of this positive energy into. And I think there's room for that kind of thing outside of, I don't go to, I don't think churches should go away. Like I just don't, I don't go. I don't watch the Grammys either. The Grammys are fine to exist. I don't, it doesn't hurt me. I don't see why it would hurt. I don't see why it hurts anybody.
Well, you know, it's interesting because on Christmas Eve, um, I had a fall right in my house, and
Oh
I
no.
broke my shoulder and my arm. And so the first thing was, of course, I'm at the emergency room, and I'm in a lot of discomfort,
Yeah, I bet. Are
a
you okay now? I can't
lot of
see your
discomfort. Um, but in the back of my mind, I just kept thinking either the medication they're going to give me or the x-ray is going to tell them something. And so I just had to keep telling myself, this pain is not forever.
That's great.
And, you know, I'm sure I did some complaining to my husband and my son. Um, but anyways, they sent me home because of course it was Christmas Eve and there was nobody around to do anything.
Oh man.
Um, and I had, meals planned and everything. And my son had come in for 2 week vacation to be with mom and dad for the holidays. And we celebrate both Christmas and Hanukkah. And so it was like, now we're celebrating nothing.
Oh man.
Everybody depends on mom. And my first reaction was to feel sorry for myself. I was going to blame the floor because I tripped. I was going to blame the door jam that I tripped into. I was going to break, blaming my bones, everything. Um, and then I thought, number one, it was an accident. It wasn't something planned. I certainly would never have planned it. Um, but I realized that I didn't have to be responsible for everything. And so,
Mm,
in a nice way, I was able to say to my husband and my son, I'm sorry we can't celebrate the way we were going to. Um, Hopefully, we can make this up to for each other in the future. Um, and we're just going to have to get through the time. And we did. And, you know, I'm not going to say it was easy, but my reaction years ago, I would have been so angry.
yeah.
I'm not sure I would have made it the 10 days until I had my surgery. Okay.
Yeah.
So I've realized that I've learned to change. My son, who also has a personality like the way I used to be, all of a sudden it was like, I'm not going to get mad. Yeah, no, this isn't the way I planned on spending the 2 weeks here at home, but it is
Yeah.
what it is. So he found his comfort zone, the things that he could do that were positive for him. And the same thing with my husband. And I realized how much alone time the three of us needed because we're always so busy. And so that week was absolutely a gift to all of us.
Hmm.
So if we look at things a little differently, okay, you know, I know illness is not necessarily a gift, but sometimes it gives us a gift of getting closer to people, getting
Hmm.
healthier in the long run. Um, I'm told that when this is finally healed within the next year, um, is going to be stronger than ever. And with all the metal and screws I have in it, it better be.
Wow. Well,
So,
something I heard you say that uh, I love was that you were in discomfort, right? And you were you were focused on positive changes, right? Like you weren't in discomfort at home yelling at people. You weren't in discomfort at home making everybody else wrong because you were uncomfortable. And I think,
I
not to
did it
get
once, though. I did that once.
well, to be expected, right? You broke your arm. But you were like, okay, I'm in discomfort. I'm gonna go to a hospital. I'm gonna have someone look at it. Is it happening as fast as I want? No. Is it happening at all? Yeah. So let's try to, bring it down a little bit. Um, and I think, I mean, honestly, I know you do and don't talk about politics, but I think that honestly, there's just a ton of people who are suffering right now.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
and I can understand the instinct or reaction to make somebody else wrong, to make that door jam wrong, or the thing you tripped on, to make those things wrong. And I think that sometimes, I mean, the door jam's a great example. Like, okay, so what? I mean, like, what are you gonna do about it? That thing happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. It did not have any ill intent.
Right.
Right? We can't punish but when we're talking about people, we can. And so I would just invite, I know that there's a lot of people suffering, and we all suffer in our own ways, or have discomfort in our own ways, to really examine where that's coming from, and what not what we can do about it to like get, to sort of like get even, or make it right, or someone else should suffer too. But how can we create more joy despite that suffering? Your example is a great one. How do we, and this is again, it's part of the creative process. You've made a little bit of a mess of the holiday now with your broken arm. It's a mess. It doesn't feel right. It's not the way that you wanted it to be. And we can look at that and we can say, oh, it's a mess. And I'm just going to sit here like you were as a kid. Like, I'm just going to focus on the mess and I'm going to cry about it. But instead you said, okay, well, is there another way that we could organize this? Maybe society doesn't work exactly the way that you want. How can you work towards small changes, or even, organizing your life in a way that does? When people are uncomfortable, and they use that discomfort to sort of lash out and hurt other people, I don't agree with that, because I don't think that actually gets us anywhere. I think if someone's uncomfortable and they can focus on, things in their family and their community to make the changes that they want to see in the world, that does start to spread. Like I talked about in my community, we don't always agree on everything. I've gotten feedback from people saying, "Oh, I don't think that thing," and we have all these tools, and we meet every month, and we talk about these things, about how we have these conversations as a point of growth, right? As opposed to a fixed mindset where like, okay, this is where I am, and this is who I am, and this is what I have, and I'm going to try to sort of like cut everybody down so that I feel, big enough. I don't, it just doesn't seem productive. It's not the values that I have anyway.
Well, and I think if people are honest, that's not what they want to do.
I
It
agree.
just seems to be very easy to do. Um, you know, I grew up in a home. My parents were very loving, but at the same time, my parents, we called them the Bickersons
Yes, I
because
remember. Yeah. The
they
old
could be
radio show, right?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, they could be so loud, and you would think that they were hating each other.
yeah. Right.
And then within minutes, my father would say something loving to my mother would say something loving to my father, and it was over and done with. And in my first marriage, I was raw from all that. So I came into the first marriage and I was going to yell and scream just as loud as my parents did. And my ex-husband was not that type of person. He was just, you want to yell and scream, then you're the crazy one. And it was like, okay, I got to change. And my husband of 41 years now, as soon as I raise my voice, he just looks at me and, in a very nice way will say, and do you mean that? And it's like, you're right. Okay, that's the old me coming out.
The
Uh,
Karen whisperer. Wow, it sounds
yeah.
like
So I love the fact that we're not going to be Pollyannas and believe that the things that are going on around us are not going on. Life is going to go on around us, but we can find some positivity to get through it. We can find the things that will make us stronger, um, and not ill, because I guarantee if we all start yelling and screaming about what we don't like in this world, um, we're not going to make it to 75 or 80 or older.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Mark, I want to thank you for joining me on Isms. I follow all your stuff that you send out, and I share it with my clients as well. So thank you so very, very much. We'll put all your information in the show notes if anybody wants to reach out. Mark does coaching as well, and I think you'd be in very good hands. So
Thank
have
you so much, Karen. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
thank you. Have a great day. Bye bye now.
Bye.